The day my wife stood up in that conference room and told her attorney, loud enough for everyone to hear, that she'd be very comfortable. Once the settlement came through, I didn't say a word. I just looked down at the legal pad in front of me, where my attorney had written 2 words in block letters. Not yet. I'd been waiting 8 months for that moment. 8 months of sleepless nights, of driving past the house I'd built with my own hands and not being allowed inside, of watching my savings drain into retainer fees while Cheryl went to Cancun with her friends and posted photos on Facebook like she was 23 years old and the world owed her a good time. I'm 61. I worked in commercial HVAC contracting for 34 years. I started as an apprentice at 22, sweating through summers in attics and crawl spaces across central Ohio, and by the time I was 40, I had my own company. 4 trucks, 12 employees, a service contract with 3 hospital systems in Columbus. Nobody handed me anything. My father worked the line at a Ford plant in Avon Lake until his knees gave out, and he always told me, "What you build with your hands, you protect with your head." I tried to live by that. Cheryl and I met at a church picnic in Westerville back in 1998. She was laughing at something her sister said, and I thought she was the most alive person I'd ever seen. We dated for 2 years, got married in June of 2000, and for the first decade or so, things were good. Not perfect, nothing ever is, but good. She worked part-time at a dental office. We raised 2 kids, Owen and Haley. We took vacations to Myrtle Beach every summer and put up a Christmas tree every year and argued about stupid things like whose turn it was to call the plumber and whether the neighbor's dog was really as harmless as they kept insisting. Then the kids grew up and moved out, and somewhere in the space that created, Cheryl found something she wanted more than what we had. I didn't know his name for a long time. I knew something was wrong. The distance, the late nights she blamed on a book club that I later confirmed met only twice a year. The way she flinched slightly when I touched her shoulder. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself we were just in one of those dry spells that married people hit in their 50s. I told myself a lot of things. The truth came out the way truth usually does, by accident. I came home early from a site inspection in February. Pipes had frozen solid, and we'd had to reschedule, and found her car in the driveway at 2 in the afternoon when she was supposed to be at work. I walked in through the garage. She was in the kitchen on the phone, and she turned around and the look on her face told me everything before she said a word. She hung up fast, said it was her sister Renee. I knew it wasn't, and she knew I knew. We didn't scream at each other. That surprised me. I just stood there in my Carhartt jacket with my boots still on, and I said, "I need you to tell me the truth." She cried. She said it had been going on for about 7 months. His name was Joel. He worked in commercial real estate and had an office in Polaris. She said she hadn't meant for it to happen. She said she was sorry. I walked back out to my truck and sat in the driveway for 45 minutes. The next day, I called an attorney named Patrick Okafor, who a buddy of mine had used during his own divorce 3 years prior and spoken very highly of. I want to be clear. I didn't call him because I was planning to immediately blow up my marriage. Part of me still wanted to save it, or thought I did. But my father's voice was in my head. Protect with your head. And I figured it was smarter to understand my options before emotions made those choices for me. Patrick was methodical, calm. He asked me a long list of questions about assets, income, property, and debts. He asked about the business. That's where things got complicated. In Ohio, assets acquired during a marriage are generally considered marital property, including a business that grows during the marriage, even if one spouse built it. My company, Coldridge Mechanical, had started before Cheryl and I got married. The original LLC was formed in October of 1999, but by 2000, when we wed, the business was still barely breaking even. The real growth came later. The hospital contracts, the expansion, the reputation, all of it built during our married years. Patrick told me plainly, Coldridge Mechanical would likely be considered at least partially marital property. Cheryl's attorney would argue she was entitled to a significant portion of its current value, which an appraisal would need to determine. He said I should be prepared for a number in the range of $400,000 to $600,000 just on the business equity alone, before we even got to the house, the retirement accounts, and the other assets. I drove home that night and sat in my kitchen. She had already moved in temporarily with Renee, and I ate a sandwich and stared at the wall. Here's what I want people to understand about that moment. I wasn't angry at the dollar amount. I was angry because I had spent 30 years building something real, something that employed 12 families, something I would eventually hand off to my son Owen if he wanted it. And the idea that someone who had checked out of our marriage for another man was going to walk away with a piece of it felt like a violation I couldn't find words for. I told Patrick I wanted to fight it. He told me we could, but that I needed to be realistic. Then, he said something that changed everything. Tell me again about the timeline of the business formation. And tell me everything you remember about the financial structure when you got married. I went home and dug out a box of documents from 2000 and 2001 that I hadn't looked at in 20 years. What I found was this. In September of 1999, 3 months before Cheryl and I got engaged, I had borrowed $40,000 from my father to capitalize the business. It was a personal loan, not from a bank, not from any joint source. From my father, Harold Glennis, who had taken it out of a savings account he'd been building since 1981. We had a handwritten agreement, signed and dated, which I had witnessed and stored in a folder along with a copy of his bank statement showing the withdrawal. The $40,000 had funded the first 2 trucks, the tools, the licensing fees, and the first 6 months of operating costs. The business was entirely funded by that separate premarital loan before Cheryl and I ever said I do. Patrick looked at the documents and went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "This changes our position significantly." It took another 5 months before we were sitting across from Cheryl and her attorney in a mediation conference room in a Columbus office building. By that point, Cheryl had found a lawyer named Arthur Voss who had a reputation for being aggressive in high-asset divorces. She walked in that morning with a leather portfolio and a look on her face like someone who had already been told she was going to win. The number her side was seeking, $680,000 in business equity, plus half the house, plus half of my 401(k). When Voss laid it out, Cheryl leaned back slightly in her chair. And that's when she said it, almost casually, like she was commenting on the weather, that she'd be very comfortable once the settlement was finalized. Her attorney smiled a little. One of Cheryl's friends who had come with her for moral support and was sitting in the hall, I was told later, had been saying all morning that Cheryl was about to finally get what she deserved. I looked at my legal pad. Patrick had written "not yet." I kept my face neutral. Patrick let Voss finish his entire presentation. He didn't interrupt. He didn't object. He just listened and took notes, and nodded occasionally like he was absorbing a weather report. Then he opened his own folder. Before we address the business valuation, Patrick said, "I'd like to introduce some documentation regarding the capitalization of Coldridge Mechanical prior to the marriage." He laid out the loan agreement between me and my father. He laid out the dated bank statement. He laid out the LLC formation documents from October 1999. He laid out the signed note, in my father's handwriting, with his social security number redacted but his signature clear, along with a notarized letter my father had provided, at Patrick's request, 2 months earlier. My father was 83 and still sharp. He had signed that letter in front of a notary in Avon Lake without hesitation. The letter stated simply that the $40,000 loan had been made from Harold Glennis's personal savings to his son for the sole purpose of establishing the business. That the loan predated the marriage by approximately 10 months, and that at the time of the marriage, the loan was still outstanding and had never been repaid from marital funds. Because I had paid it back from business revenue in 2003, 3 years into the marriage, from a business account in my name alone. Voss looked at the documents. He looked at them for a long time. "This doesn't change the fact that the business grew substantially during the marriage," he said. "You're right," Patrick said. "And we are not contesting that. We're contesting the characterization of the foundational capital as a marital asset. The business was built on a premarital financial investment. The value at the time of marriage, which we have documented, was approximately $18,000 in net assets. We're happy to have a valuation conversation about marital contribution to growth, but the foundation is not on the table. Voss said he'd need to review the documentation and potentially depose my father. Patrick said, "Of course. He's 83 and lives in Lorraine County, so I'd ask that you keep any deposition brief, but he's agreed to cooperate fully." Cheryl, for the first time that morning, looked uncertain. What followed was another 3 months of back and forth. Voss brought in a forensic accountant to value the business growth attributable to marital years versus pre-marital foundation. Patrick brought in his own. There were phone calls and letters and revised proposals. I won't pretend it wasn't exhausting. There were nights I drove to Dairy Queen at 11 o'clock and sat in the parking lot eating a blizzard because I needed something simple and normal and sweet. But the documentation held. My father's loan was real. The dates were real. The paper trail was real. The final settlement looked like this. Cheryl received $210,000. Representing the court's finding of her equitable share of business growth attributable to marital years only, not the foundation capital. She received her half of the equity in the house, which came to $94,000. She received half of the joint savings account, which was $31,000. She received nothing from my 401(k) because her retirement account was of similar value, and Patrick successfully argued for a clean offset. The total payout was $335,000. Still significant, still painful, but less than half of what she had walked into that conference room expecting. Voss filed a motion for reconsideration. The judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Sutherland, who had clearly seen everything in her years on the family court bench, denied it in 11 days flat. I found out about the denial on a Tuesday morning. Patrick called me while I was on a job site in Gahanna. I was standing in the parking lot of a medical office building, watching one of my guys on a scissor lift, and I said, "Thank you," and hung up and stood there for a while. I didn't feel like celebrating. That surprised me. I thought I would. Instead, I felt something quieter, not peace exactly, but something close to it. Like a door closing on a chapter that had cost me more than money. A few people have asked me since then why I didn't fight harder, why I settled instead of pushing for even less. My answer is always the same, because I got what I actually needed. The business is whole. 12 people still have jobs. Owen has a future if he wants it. That was the point. Not punishment. Protection. I called my father that evening. He picked up on the second ring, like he always does. I told him it was over. He asked me if I was okay. I said I thought I would be. He said, "Good. Come up on Saturday, I'll make chili." I drove up to Avon Lake that Saturday. We sat at his kitchen table with bowls of chili and watched a Cleveland Browns game and didn't talk about any of it for a long time. At halftime he said, "Your grandfather always said the best revenge is stability." I laughed. He laughed too. Then we watched the second half. I'm not going to tell you divorce doesn't leave marks. It does. I still drive past that house sometimes. We sold it, split the proceeds. It belongs to a young couple now with a Labrador and a garden bed they clearly don't know what to do with yet. And I feel something I don't quite have a name for. Not grief exactly. Not regret. Just the weight of 30 years, which doesn't vanish because a judge signs a paper. But here's what I will tell you. If you have built something, a business, a savings, a life, document it. Every dollar, every date, every source. Not because you expect betrayal. Not because you're planning for the worst, but because the truth, when it matters, can only protect you if it's written down. My father understood that. He kept that loan agreement in a fireproof box in his closet for 25 years, on the off chance it would ever matter. It mattered. Coldridge Mechanical is still operating out of the same shop in Westerville. We picked up a new contract with a school district in Delaware County last spring. I hired a 22-year-old apprentice named Garrett who reminds me of myself 39 years ago. Eager, a little reckless, not yet afraid of heights. I told him last week, in the middle of explaining how to braze a copper fitting, "Whatever you build, keep the receipts." He laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't.